My dad's family worked there for years and years and years, all his brothers as far as I know. There were quite a lot of them, quite a big family. Dad never talked about anything though, really. I've tried to look at the family because, as I say, Dad just used, he said he was one of 13 actually, but I can only really find 11 or 12. I think even yesterday I found one. I think there were 2 Joes. I think they had a son called Joe, Grandma and Grandad, who I never knew. And then I think he might have died as a child, so they named the next one Joe, but gave him a different second name. Now I know Uncle Joe, Uncle, we called him Renza, but I think his name was actually Lorenzo. And then there was, Arthur, who was killed, John that was killed. There was Raymond, who was the youngest one, and my dad, who was Alan. And then there were 4 girls. So it's quite a big family, but they did in them days, didn't they? Had big families. To be honest, what I've learned, because Dad never talked about it, the only thing I ever knew about it was Mum saying, oh, your dad had 2 brothers that was killed and your granddad was injured. And that's all I ever knew. I've actually learnt more from this project than I ever knew, which is strange. But then looked into it further and Dad was only 10 when it happened. So I don't know what he remembered of it. I mean, I suppose he was at the age of 10 and he'd got brothers who were considerably older than him. So I suppose in some ways maybe he was used to them leaving home, because I know a couple of the aunties had got married and a couple of my uncles had got married, so perhaps they were just leaving home gradually anyway. I don't know if it impacted him or not. Never spoke about it, ever. I was actually a second-year student nurse at the Royal Hospital when the 1973 disaster happened. So I would be 20 years old. And when the call came in, I was on the night shift, and the call came in that there'd been an accident at the pit. And I remember the night superintendent at the time sort of telling us all to just be alert and be ready to do anything, that was asked. Now, I was working on the children's ward at the time, and it was one of the only places, I think there was 2 or 3, where they had qualified nurses on at night. Otherwise, it was night sisters that just went around the hospital and dealt with issues as they arose. And they took the staff nurse off the children's ward to go to A&E and left me in charge of a children's ward. I was really, really nervous about it. The thing was, mostly the children's ward was on the top floor, on the 2nd floor. And you didn't wake the children up at that early. So I was in the office and looking out the window, and you could see as the ambulances came in with the miners. And I closed my eyes, I can still see it now. It must have traumatised me without me realising it, really. And the ambulances came in through the indoor, pulled up in front of the A&E, and a doctor came out, and I could see into the ambulance because the top windows weren't obscured. And there was a miner laid on one trolley, a miner laid on another trolley in the ambulance. The doctor went out, certified them dead. The ambulance went out, the next one came in, and that was just repeated. It was, and then the biggest impact for me personally, I went home late, as everybody did that morning, and Dad was still in bed. He was on a late shift, he was on afternoons, and I said to Mum, where's Dad? And she said, oh, he's still in bed. Oh, my dad couldn't get up in the morning. He'd be on early shift, getting up at 5. We'd all be up before him. We'd all be awake because Dad couldn't wake up. And I went in and I just said to him, Dad, there's been an accident. The cage has gone to the bottom at Markham. And he said, what? And he got out of bed. And I've never seen him move so fast. And he put his clothes on. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to help. That was it. It was, I don't know, quite I think I realised then just how close-knit the mining family were, really. And when I got up, got up later in the day, because we'd been told to go home, go to bed, because you're going to be busy when you get back to work. So I was back on that night. And he was just sat there, looking into space. Now, whether that triggered memories of the other pit disaster where his brothers had been killed, I've no idea, because he didn't talk about it. I wish I'd have asked, but I didn't know anything at that stage about my uncles being killed, and my granddad being really injured. So, wish I could ask him now, but he died young. Well, I've been talking to a few of my friends, telling them I was going to make this recording, and one of my friends, she's in her 80s now, and she was actually working in intensive care at that time, and she was saying that when they brought one of the miners down, and it's one of the things that's stuck in my mind. She says, we brought one of the miners down to intensive care, took one of them down, and they were washing them, because even though they were only just going down the pit, they were filthy. They'd got coal dust all over them. And she said she was giving him a wash, and he'd got something clutched in his hand. When she opened his hand, it was an egg sandwich. So he was obviously eating his breakfast in the cage when it went down. Another of my friends, who was a student nurse, she was on the day shift. And she said she spent the entire shift washing the men because they were all covered in coal dust. And she said she finished the shift, went home, couldn't settle, went back, and then stayed till really late at night, just washing and then washing and washing, because they were so covered in coal dust. And when she got home, her mum says, "You been down pit?" She was that dirty herself. And they're just memories, aren't they? Memories. Not long after the 73 disaster, I don't know how long it was after, we were invited to go down a coal mine. And I think it was Blackwell, but don't quote me on that, I'm not quite sure. And we did go down. I went down in the cage, a few of us went, and they said, right, if you go any further, you're going to have to crawl through the seam, the coal seam. There's no turning round, there's no room to turn round. It's about a mile long, and I did it, and we all did it. Nobody dropped out, and it made me realise just what the conditions are. You think you think what it's like down a coal mine, but that really opened my eyes to what the conditions were down a coal mine. Went home, there was nowhere to wash when we came up. I got in the car, got home, walked in, my dad took one look at me, burst out laughing, because I was black, absolutely black. But,